Donald Trump, the reason that they kept having him on Fox, this is before, Mark Penn in 2008 doing that stuff. So Donald Trump constantly on Fox News doing the birtherism thing. Maybe he's from Africa. He never probably necessarily said he's Muslim, but that was the whole implication of the entire birtherism thing.
It definitely fueled a lot.
Right, and so Fox News fuels this birtherism, which then fuels Trump, and now is utterly appalled that they're losing control of it. And so we're like several degrees of lost control down. So first, you have like Boehner and Cantor absolutely loving the energy of the Tea Party and thinking that this is going to get them back in the majority. It does, but it also decapitates both of them. So they lose control of the Tea Party. Then you have the Tea Party losing control to the Trump movement. And for some reason, everybody that takes control under this process thinks that this is the end of the process, that now they are going to be the ones that are going to be able to manage this chaos that they've unleashed. And now all of a sudden, Trump has endorsed Dr. Oz, and you've got somebody who's taking the birtherism and Obama's a Muslim and all this crazy stuff, which YouTube monitors, not true, none of it's true. And taking it to its logical extreme and just saying it out loud. And to have Hannity be the one to be appalled at that, it's like, well, wait a minute. This is the energy that you unleashed. And what I love about this coming primary, I don't know what's going to happen. Like she could win. You know, right. Maybe Oz and McCormick have annihilated each other enough with enough money that people are like, you know what? This is the next generation of Trumpism, whether Trump's with her or not.
As someone who's sort of on the right in conservative media, it has been so ugly in terms of oppo, who's falling on what side, who is trying to undercut who really, really quickly. And so it's hard to say, because in some ways, Dr. Oz is representative of Trumpism. Very sort of progressive on LGBT issues, and then also, by the way, on China. That's another thing that's factored into Dr. Oz. He's getting a lot of criticism for being too friendly with China, and so and then sort of switching. Right. And you can see how in certain cases these things are representative and reflective. And I think what will be most telling is when reporters are out there at the polls talking to voters. I'm going to be curious to see more about why voters say they're supporting X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
And that I think will be particularly telling in terms of if it's Trumpism, Trump the man, if it was very localized, even though people tried to nationalize it. There's just so much going on. The blind spots Republicans used to have almost shifted to Democrats, because Republicans, for political reasons, are now sort of reaching out to working Americans and trying to at least get their ear into those conversations. And I think it's having some effect, at least on the fact that Republicans were on top of this before Democrats were.
And I think the last thing I'd say would be this should put some focus on milk banks. I mean, that's by no means like a solution to this immediate crisis, but so there are milk banks around the country where people can donate breast milk.
Yeah. And
they're just massively under-resourced, yet there are so many babies in NICUs and also beyond that would be so much better off if they're drinking breast milk rather than formula. And there are, I think, many people who would be donating, many more people that would be donating if it were easier to do.
Right.
My family did. We did it more than 10 years ago, and it was very difficult, because of the way that they're so under-resourced. And if we've got $40 billion that we can just print up for Ukraine, it wouldn't take much to just say, look, this type of investment is going to return itself over, a millionfold.
It's amazing how much we take for granted the security of the supply chains when they're working correctly. We totally take for granted how dependent we are on what is actually a very, very fragile ecosystem. And so that's another reason I think particularly those centers are underappreciated, because if you're one of the people who has, under normal circumstances, no problem buying what you want in bulk, it's never an issue. You can go to Costco and you can buy incredible incredible amounts anytime you want for a relatively low price. And in a situation like this, when that's gone, I mean, it does shed light on how fragile this is for people always in particular circumstances, or how difficult it is for people in particular circumstances. But I think it has been an interesting illustration and lesson in how out of touch a lot of people who talk about politics and actually make our policy are on certain issues. And it took people who have babies in the media and in politics to really start talking about this, hearing from moms or being mothers themselves. And imagine if it happened on this issue, imagine what happens on other issues where they have really no skin in the game at all.
Yeah. No, it's utterly terrifying. And I'm just personally glad that we're beyond the formula phase. This just sounds horrifying.
It completely sounds horrifying. Although hopefully, it's one of the situations that could have a silver lining, like the PPE situation early in COVID did, that we reshore supply chains and secure them. But that hasn't totally happened yet, so we'll see if it does. But yeah, I mean, if there is a silver lining to this, it's that it's a wake-up call. But that means it actually has to function as a wake-up call.
Right, and maybe some consequences. Like, how about some negligence? How about some actual consequences for people who do this?
Yeah, just
how about that?
It's all anyone's asking for.
Investigate these companies, and all of a sudden you change the balance then between how valuable it is to you to skim that money off the top versus reinvesting. 'Cause you gotta change that formula, otherwise people are just going to keep walking away with the money.
I'm all for that. Although not optimistic it'll happen.
I actually think that we should just ban TikTok in the United States, because I believe that in a democracy that we should be able to have some democratic say over the way that we structure our society. And we can't with TikTok.
Yeah.
It's not ours. It's basically a foreign app. I mean, I know there's been some effort to get like U.S. investors and
it's BS.
Involved in it or
the
whatever.
The way that they've tried to restructure has been smoke and mirrors. They're still based in Beijing and owned by ByteDance.
And so banning it is by no means a solution to the various overlapping social media crises that we have.
No.
But it's a start. Like, if you don't do that, like you're just handing to this company the weapons to just constantly sow as much misery and emotional and political turmoil as they see fit. And they don't even they want to make a profit, but that might not be their ultimate objective.
Yeah, if you look at the top yearly trends on TikTok, it's amazing how much time kids are spending on this app. Like, not to sound like Ben Shapiro, but the WAP video was one of the top trends on TikTok, which is like fine if you're 20 years old, but there are a lot of kids who are not 20 years old who are scrolling through it, and that's again the least of the concerns. I think the bigger concerns are about like really, really sexual situations that you can get into on live streams, where again, like people from that are our age, older, know like what that was like on the instant message boards in the 90s and in the 2000s. But on TikTok, again, like this is where kids are spending an insane amount of time. They're very young. It's totally unsupervised. You don't have to sit at the desktop computer and log on to the dial-up with your parents walking around in the background. So there's just so many problems with it. I would say the ban on national security grounds is a pretty obvious substantiation for how that would happen. But this is why, to me, it's so much deeper than even just TikTok, as you said. Like banning TikTok, as consumers, I think people need to take this much more seriously. And I'm not sure that older people who are now parents and use Facebook in some very normal ways, like playing games or connecting with people from high school, whatever it is, understand exactly how bad this has gotten for a 12-year-old who's spending a lot of unsupervised time on Snapchat, TikTok, Instagram. The access and the ease at which it can access you without your control of just seedy people with bad intentions who are shaping young hearts and minds like literally every single day with exploitive bad intentions. It is chilling.
How I got involved was I came back from Iraq in end of October 2006. Within 60 days, I put a loaded 9mm to my temple and I pulled the trigger. A squib load, a manufacturing defect in the ammunition, is the reason I'm alive. I have 5 attempts like that. I've slit my wrists. I've tried to overdose. After my final suicide attempt in November of 2013, the VA finally got me actual weekly counseling every week. And 1 week, my doc had an issue on the inpatient floor and said, I can't meet with you. Can you meet with my intern? That intern slid a piece of paper across the desk and said, I think this will help you. Stick it in your pocket. Don't open it till you leave. Opened it up and it said, Google MDMA PTSD. And I discovered there was a clinical trial in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, right across the bridge, called, applied, and was accepted. I legitimately didn't think it would work, but was willing to try anything at that point after multiple suicide attempts, hospitalizations. And that doesn't even count the hundreds of times I stood on a bridge and just walked away. I had run out of options. And I went through it. And that was 7 years ago. Interestingly enough, my refrad date from the Army in Iraq was November 22nd in 2006. I took my first dose of MDMA in my entire life, November 22nd, 2014. And so this November 22nd, I will have been healed of PTSD as long as I had it. But to the second part of your question, why veterans? One, we're one of the few groups that everyone will listen to, and if they don't, they typically get in trouble for it. But also, our trauma is socially acceptable. Nobody, men, women who are raped, victims of domestic violence, all the other ways you can be traumatized, don't want to go, on Hill Rising and talk about their trauma, whereas veterans have a unique ability that our trauma is viewed as socially acceptable. And the veterans who have done it know that this works. And we all have friends who haven't done this, who haven't been able to have access to this, that, we get a call at 2:00 in the morning and we spend 3 hours talking them out of killing themselves. And we know there's a solution, and military have a hard time leaving their brothers and sisters behind.
Big shout out to Raytheon for being completely correct when they said on that January 25th earning call, which we've talked about a couple of times. This is the CEO of Raytheon who said that, quote, I fully expect we're going to see some benefit from it. And that was included in that sentence. He was talking about tensions in Eastern Europe, among other conflicts around the world. And that's absolutely right. It turned out to be completely correct. And the amount that they're going to see, it's not some benefit. They're going to see enormous benefit from it. And it will not have sufficient oversight, as you point out in this fantastic breakdown of the bill. I mean, it's insane when you peel back the layers of this legislation to see exactly how the sausage is getting made. It really is gross.
And I was glad to see Massey call out the military-industrial complex like he did on Fox, and maybe we can add those comments.
The other committee that I serve on is the Transportation Committee. And I can tell you, with the $40 billion that we spent last night, added to the $14 billion we've already spent, that's $54 billion. That's equal to the entire amount that the federal government spends on roads and bridges every year. So the next time you hit a pothole and you have to replace your tire or your rim, or you're sitting in traffic, just remember that Congress could have doubled spending on our own infrastructure instead of sending that money to Ukraine. Well, I think it's wrong to use Ukraine as a grinding stone against the Russian military, because even though American blood isn't being spilled there, blood is being spilled. We should look for an end to this conflict. But I'm worried that the military-industrial complex doesn't want an end. $54 billion, that's suspiciously close to the annual amount we were spending in Afghanistan every year. And so as soon as we stop spending $50 billion in Afghanistan, now we're spending $50 billion in Ukraine. If only the military-industrial complex made baby formula, we'd be okay. We'd have enough to fill up our swimming pools with that kind of money.
Really disingenuous of him to say, it's such a shame that we're spending the money in Ukraine when we can't, and so that we're not spending it here. Next time you drive over a pothole, think of Ukraine. That's basically what he was saying. Thomas Massey voted against the bipartisan infrastructure bill. I actually think that's completely consistent, because he voted against it because that money was going without a lot of strings attached, with a lot of pork. And if you're one of those hardcore sort of libertarian members, I think it is consistent. If you're a libertarian, you think you should fix your own pothole.
Absolutely.
What are you complaining about?
Absolutely. Bring a shovel. Yeah. Yes. So I think it's consistent from Massey's perspective. But it is interesting to compare, these numbers. There's even psychological social science on how past a certain threshold, our minds don't really process numbers in a way that it's like 5 versus 2 versus 20. But when you get into 40 billion, it's like, well, what does that mean in comparison to what we're spending on X, Y, and Z at home? That is an incredible amount of money compared to what we spend on some of our own programs here. And the entitlement to just get it and intentionally get it without sufficient oversight mechanisms, to intentionally put that in the bill, as you just broke down, it is just classic. That is so typical.